I am here with Richard Sherman. He is professor of flute at Michigan State University and my former professor for my undergrad, and also principal flute of the Lansing Symphony, where I play as well. And what are you drinking this morning?
You were very kind to bring me a decaf cappuccino.
Delicious.
Yeah, delicious.
All right, let's dive right in. My first question that I ask everyone: what brand of flute do you play, and what drew you to that brand?
Wow. Well, for years, I played Powell when I was in the Rochester Philharmonic. This is 20 some odd years ago. And then I went to Burkhart briefly, and now I've settled pretty much on Miramatsu pretty exclusively. I have 3 of them. I have a 9 carat, and I have a heavy wall silver, and I have a platinum clad. And part of the beauty of playing Miramatsu is Miramatsu Americas in Detroit. So I have a very close relationship with the people over there in Royal Oak. So it's helpful.
Yeah, we're very Miramatsu friendly over here at Michigan State.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we are.
I also play Miramatsu. Where did you go to school for your degrees, and what teachers did you study with through school?
I studied at the Eastman School with Bonnie Boyd, and then I went on to get a master's degree with Walford Kujala at Northwestern, and then I did postgraduate work with William Bennett in London. But at the time, he wasn't affiliated with the Royal Academy where he is now, I think. So I just studied with him privately at the time.
Okay. And you didn't end up with a degree from him then?
No,
you just studied
I just studied with him independently.
Okay.
On a ITT fellowship, which was kind of like a Fulbright, but from their under their auspices.
Oh wow, okay, so it was paid for. You didn't just...
Yeah. I would never been able to afford it otherwise. They paid for. It was a great thing at the time that they sponsored.
And do you think that doing a degree overseas, not in America, was it very different? Like, did it have a big bearing on your playing in terms of the differences between American and European styles, or at the time was there not that big of a difference?
Well, I think that the attraction was specifically at the time for me William Bennett's playing, the vibrancy of his sound. I'd heard quite a few recordings. Back then, we didn't have the internet yet. It's hard to believe. So you got your information from recordings that you had to go to the library most of the time. Vinyl discs were still in vogue. And I always was attracted to his playing. And so I wrote my grant to study over there, specifically with him in mind.
Okay.
I did take some courses at the Royal College of Music, but he wasn't affiliated with them. So as far as, I thought that his playing was sort of an extension of the Mariano School in a way. All of my teachers had studied with Joseph Mariano. Even in high school, my teacher, Don McDonald, who used to teach at SUNY Potsdam, was a Mariano protege, basically. So I had certain aesthetic values that I wanted to see continue about, the way we use our air, and I thought that Bennett did that well. So I think there are universal concepts that are attractive aesthetically, and I suppose if I didn't worry about the language barrier, I would have looked for the similar type of attributes in a French player,
right.
But I just thought England would be easier.
Yeah.
And everyone told me that you couldn't get a Fulbright or an overseas grant to England because there was no language requirement. And I said, well, someone's got to get it.
Yeah.
So I applied for it, and I got it. So it was a good experience for me. It was broadening, hearing the London orchestras, and I went to a lot of theater that year also. So it was fun.
And I have to say, the London Symphony has been on my list recently. I've just been obsessively listening to their recordings. I don't know what it is, but they've just been drawing me in. I think it's so interesting, too, you talking about the similarities between the legacy of teachers that you've had, because I've been thinking about this recently, too. You're the only teacher I've ever had that's not a Willoughby student.
Wow.
And so I started to think about that, how it's very interesting that we get drawn to this school of thought sometimes that's just very similar, and when you step back a second to look at it, it's quite amazing how all of that works out.
Yeah, I think our early influences have a profound influence on our tonal and aesthetic concept, if you like. And so I have to say that I will do a disclaimer here. I definitely am from the Mariano tradition. but I owe a tremendous debt to James Galway also.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, when I was in high school, I had spent all my early formative years really listening to Ron Paul because he was the most recorded artist of the time. And then in like junior or senior year of high school, The Man with the Golden Flute, James Galway's first album, came out on RCA. And I remember my father brought it home, and I just never heard anything like it. It was a very arresting sound. It was very dynamic. And the thing that I really was fascinated by was his ability to get around the instrument like an acrobat.
Yeah.
And, you know, up until that point, this is pre-Cooper scale and the modifications that happened to the flute. The low register was still kind of stuffy, and we were happy if it came out. And the high register was really the glory of most flutists. And he sort of turned that on its head a little bit. He made it a much more low register, powerful approach. And I thought it was an amazing ability he had to get around the instrument. And so I've always sort of been striving to try to get that in my own playing too. And I think that Galway has been very generous in the last few years, especially on YouTube, talking about sound production.
Yeah.
And I'm very pragmatic when it comes to approaching the instrument. I think that I want to take as much mystery out of it as I can for my students and make it easier for them to play. I want to know certain basic fundamental things that I can count on. And I think I have been striving my whole career to sort of hone that so that I feel confident imparting that to other people.
All right. So, you're fresh out of school.
I am.
And
Long time ago now.
Now it's time to work.
Yeah.
So how many, and I know that you started the orchestra route, so how many auditions did you take before you won your first job?
I had taken a few auditions while I was still in school. As a junior, I went to the Montreal Symphony and was surprised that I advanced. And I can't remember, there were several Pittsburgh Symphony auditions back then when I was still in school or just out of school. And then I went to London. I came back and there was an audition for assistant in Boston. I remember I came back twice because I made the finals or got out of the first round, and I had to come back and play again. So I'm sort of sketchy about this in my memory, but I remember that the first job I was actually offered was I took an audition down in Sarasota. It was for the Florida West Coast Symphony.
Oh.
And I got offered that job through a recommendation. But that same year, I had, there was an opening for Rochester. My former teacher had taken a leave, and someone else was filling in within the section for a year, and then they had a formal audition. And I remember I was still at Tanglewood. I was working that summer, and I drove over. It's like the only audition I ever drove to. There's something strange about that. Usually, you fly someplace. But anyway, it was an involved process, but that was my first job. And from there, I didn't stay very long.
That's actually the next question is, basically, now that I've introduced you as the professor at Michigan State, so between Rochester and Michigan State, this will be a two-part question. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it'll be a two-part question.
Oh, go ahead.
How many jobs did you have in between? And then specifically for you, because I know that this is something you might want to speak on, what made you make the decision to leave the orchestra and switch gears to going into professorship?
Well, I remember when I was an undergrad, I said to Bonnie Boyd one day in a lesson, this is when I still had stars in my eyes about the orchestral world, I said, if I ever got a principal job, I would never quit. And she looked at me in her very sort of knowing way and said, we'll see. And I think that there should be some course offerings on the realities of orchestral life versus our idealized version of it. I think you have to know that you like performing on a regular basis, that you want to be on stage every week. For some people, that's a very attractive thing. For me, I was always a person who was, I realized now, I had started at Eastman as a music ed major. So I don't...
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I never had any delusions or illusions of a performing career. I was always pragmatic. My father said, you have to be able to get a job. And he also said I was independent when I was 21. So that was incentive. Mm-hmm. And so, but I ended up switching my major. Why? In my freshman year, because I had trumpet methods before flute lessons, and my lips were itchy and I couldn't really handle it. So Rochester was a dream come true for me because mm-hmm. I had auditioned for extra when I was an undergraduate, and so imagine my great elation when 4 or 5 years later I was succeeding my teacher, who mm-hmm. I revered greatly and still do. So when I got into the orchestra, there's a lot to playing in an orchestra, not just the music you play, it's also making a living. And as they cut our season increasingly, I got worried. I had a young family at the time. And so one day someone came in rehearsal and said, Rick, there's an opening at Michigan State University for flute professorship.
And so you had taught at Eastman at
some point, I had been teaching adjunct at Eastman since I was 24, because when Bonnie Boyd first went on maternity leave, she said, you're going to be asked. I said, I'm not ready. She said, well, you better get ready.
Right.
But
just to throw that in there for anyone who thinks that there was no prior experience teaching at that level. You had that experience, and I'm sure that mattered when you applied for this job too.
I think so.
To a degree.
I think so, but just to frame it, I really didn't have a full-time teaching job before I applied here, mm-hmm. and I had experience at a conservatory like Eastman. You can't get better than that. But I didn't know anything about Michigan State except I knew about Elsa Verder.
Yeah.
But I wasn't sure whether she taught at MSU or U of M.
Yeah, people get very, very strange about the two universities here.
They do.
Confused.
Yeah. They definitely do.
Yeah.
Unless you live in Michigan and
right.
You're really clear.
Then you know.
You really do know, yeah. So anyway, I applied, and I think that University of Michigan was open at the same time, and who was I as a teacher? Nobody knew me, and that's when Leon Bicey went to U of M, and I came here the same year.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. So we came at the same time, and honestly, I partly came because I'm very pragmatic. I wanted to know that I had a secure job for my family. I had one child by that time, and when we came to East Lansing, we ended up having 2 more children. And so I felt like it was a better environment. I was stressing out playing every week. That's why I brought that up before. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of musicians struggle with balancing their personal life with the rigors of their performing life. I come from sort of an educational mindset, I think, and I think it's more than that. I think I like the alone time that is required mm-hmm. to study and to practice and to explore and discover. I don't know who it was. Was it? It's either Picasso. I think it's Picasso. It said that artists are by definition selfish, and I used to feel terrible about that. Except that you have to spend a lot of time on your own. You have to be honing your skills all the time in your craft, and sometimes balancing the personal with the professional is very difficult. But I thought it would be better here. And actually, I think in many respects, the pressure was less intense. And since I feel like a hybrid, because I'm still playing full-time in the summer in the Chautauqua Symphony, I remember Bonnie Boyd saying, it's like having the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so from now that you don't have the peer orchestra thing going for you, what does a typical practice day for you look like? How do you like to structure your practice?
I try to fit it in around my lesson schedule, bottom line. So I come in, if my lessons start at 10, I will practice anywhere from 8 to 10 in the morning. And I try to be more efficient about my playing time. Uh-huh. But I tend to be, what a former student of mine realized about in observing the studio, is that I have little stations. Every stand has different music on it. I never noticed it, but he did. And he said, I like go from flower to flower to flower, taking little bits of different things.
Oh my gosh, I never thought about it.
Yeah, I never did either. But this is 5
music stands in this room right now.
Yeah, they
wow.
are. It was Danilo Metsadri, who teaches at University of Southern Mississippi, who's coming up with a practice method that I don't even want to get into because it's so brilliant and involved, and he could maybe speak to you sometime about it. But he's the one who pointed out to me just this past spring when I was down there doing a master class that I do this sort of intrinsically, that I think because in former generations people would have called someone like me ADD or ADHD. I prefer to think that I get bored very quickly. So I think for me, I've never been an advocate of practicing 3 hours at a time. This was the long way around to say that if I set up little oases for myself where I like a little bit of this music, a little of this music, and it's all diverse, it keeps my attention. And if I mix it up, I think I'm approaching things from a lot of different angles, because composers will write different things for flutists. I remember Galway saying when he was visiting that he thinks we should do etudes written by flutists. And I say, yeah, because they know the difficulties. But Stravinsky wrote some of the most difficult stuff. We have to be able to do it all.
Yeah.
So I don't care who writes the music. I love playing the Paganini Caprices. I like the Jean-Jean etudes, which I think were originally for clarinet. I think so, the ones we have. At least they have them. So I'm kind of eclectic in my practice style. I just say play. If you need to do scales, of course I think that the fundamentals are important. But I've always sort of approached fundamentals through repertoire. I'm big on etudes. I always have an etude book in my backpack just because I feel like it keeps me vested in the fundamentals in a way that it's all in one place. Sometimes I go between the Bain Caprices to, I like the Damas etudes now, and all the Anderson. I don't think any of that's wasted.
And my final question is, it's a bit of a broader question too, so you can answer however you'd like. For anyone who is currently pursuing their performance career, or for someone who is, maybe in high school and thinking about pursuing a career in music, do you have one piece of advice you'd like to impart on them, or something you'd like to maybe even warn them about, or something like that?
I wouldn't issue any warnings to anyone about anything, because I kind of feel like everyone has limitless possibilities. I think that that's just a given, and anyone who tells you something else, run. I mean, my whole attitude in the beginning, when I talked about it earlier about that, getting that grant to England, lots of people said, no, you can't get a Fulbright to England. Now, everyone wants them. And my attitude was, well, someone's got to get it.
Right.
So I say that right from the outset, that I think that why shouldn't it be you? However, if you are not going to take responsibility, that the buck stops with you in music, music doesn't lie, and auditions don't lie, and they can be very subjective. But in the end, if you don't know the repertoire, if you can't deliver, you'll be discounted. So there's no excuse, there's no shortcut for doing your work. And in the end, as an artist, when you're performing, it is just about you. I come back to that quote, artists are by definition selfish. Be selfish about your excellence. And don't feel self-conscious about the time that it's going to take. You're going to sometimes feel a little disconnected. But I think that's part of the process. It's a solitary road, and it's not an easy one. And I'm not going to tell people that if they can do something else, they should, because I think that that's very negative. But I was thinking about you earlier today, because I was thinking about how diligent you've been in the audition circuit, and how I just had filled up my gas tank, actually, and then you popped into my mind because I was going to be seeing you, and how much I admired your tenacity. But I took it a step further, and I said, it's because he can do nothing else. I have a great story to tell you. When I came back from England, having studied, there was this movie called Flashdance. Do you remember that movie? You're a little young for it.
No, but I know the
Jennifer
movie.
Beals. And there's this great line, I had just come back from Europe, and there's this great line in which, I don't know who it is, in which character says, if you give up your dream, you die. And I got all teary-eyed because I didn't know where I was going in my career. And all I can tell people is one thing leads to another. You just keep working. Now, I will say that you must have a singular focus. To be a flutist, I think, flute is like on this level in terms of expectation and standard. Mm-hmm. It's very high. And so, get to work, right? You have to, I think I would tell high school students, get exposed to great players. Go to symphony concerts. I mean, first time I heard Scheherazade, the last movement, tonguing, I said, oh my God, as a freshman in college, I said, I can't tongue that fast. And that's when Bonnie Boyd in her wisdom looked back at me and said, when your throat relaxes and you open up, your tonguing will be easier. Very Zen-like. And I said, but I can't tongue that fast. And eventually, it's a process is what I'm getting at, is that, Rome wasn't built in a day, but you have to be on your own time frame and just stick to it like an athlete in a way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
I will make sure to put in the links below a link to the Michigan State College of Music website, along with a direct link to your page on that website.
Oh, that's very nice.
And also, hopefully, a link to a YouTube video or two of your playing for everyone to watch. And if you have any questions for Professor Sherman, you can either field them through me or get a hold of him through the Michigan State website. Thank you so much, and thank you.
Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah.
It's a great pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.